So folks, as I mentioned, we are going to go ahead and get going here with our next panel discussion just to keep ourselves on time and to keep the agenda moving along. Excited for the conversation that we're going to have. And I was actually just talking with this gentleman. It's going to be a little similar to the panel that we had earlier with the rural entrepreneurs, an opportunity to discuss some of the challenges that some of these innovators are having and maybe get a little bit more technical on some of the advances that they're looking to pursue in that bio-based economy, in that issue of recycling waste. And I pledge that I will make a very, very small number of manure jokes, but I can't promise that I will actually live up to that promise. So for this conversation, we're going to be joined by four gentlemen much smarter than I on this topic. Joined on your far right and my far left by Kent Swisher, the president and CEO of the North American Renderers Association. Next to Kent, Scott Kalb, the co-founder and chairman of Bright Feeds. Then we have Samuel Liebl, the Director of Sustainability and Communications for Denali. Last but certainly not least, Stanley Janicki, the Chief Revenue Officer for Sedron Technologies. And gentlemen, I think the first thing we got to do, and I'm going to start with you on this one, Stanley, is walk us through what it is that your business is doing, what makes you unique, and how that effort has been going for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thank you all so much for the time here. Sedron Technologies is a company that takes various waste streams and upcycles them into valuable byproducts that displace fossil fuel commodities. So in the dairy industry, we build our Varcor system on the back of large dairies, on the back of their anaerobic digesters, and take dairy digestate, which is what comes out of the digester, and produce renewable nitrogen fertilizer that's liquid, that's certified organic, an organic dry solid phosphorus fertilizer, and crystal clear clean water. This allows large-scale dairy farms to pursue a net zero carbon story because they no longer have a lagoon and the methane emissions from that. They're able to change their agronomic practices. And it allows us to produce valuable fertilizer products that are transportable out of various watersheds to solve nutrient pollution. And then, of course, we monetize those fertilizer products to get a return on our investment. It's a very exciting process.
It's great to be here. I'm in the unique position of Denali touches the sorts of business that all the gentlemen on this stage are involved with. We refer to ourselves as the largest full-service recycler of organics in the country. To do with recycling food waste, we handle food waste from every Walmart in the country that has kind of a fresh produce department, about 10,000 grocery stores in total. We are one of the largest managers and beneficial reusers of biosolids in the country. And we also do work that overlaps with the rendering industry. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm sure I'll tell you more about what we do as we go.
Of course. Scott?
First, I have to put on my hat, my Bright Feeds hat. So hello, everybody. I'm chairman and co-founder of Bright Feeds. We actually got our start because we were trying to deal with the waste crisis in our state, and which is going on nationally. Waste is growing, and our waste system is broken. The only thing we do with our waste is we burn it or we bury it, and we have a few different other processes for dealing with it. So we started working with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and we realized that food waste was the place to be. And so we developed some unique patented technologies. We have two technologies. We convert wasted food into animal feed. There's two aspects of this which I think are very exciting. The first is the economic side, because the generators of food waste have a huge economic problem. It costs about $120 to $150 a ton to dispose of your waste, food waste, at a landfill or at an incinerator. And, it's an enormous waste. We're burning or burying our dollars. We can take that food waste for free, and in fact, we even will pay for the food waste depending on the nutrient value. The second aspect that's very interesting and exciting is that we have a carbon negative process. So we actually, for every ton of food waste that we process, we remove 1 ton of carbon emissions from the atmosphere. So we set up our first plant about a year ago now in Connecticut, And we went from 0 to processing 150 tons a day currently of food waste. And it's growing. There's a huge response. And we're already looking at setting up our second and third plants. We have the largest permitted capacity in all of New England for handling food waste. And in 1 year, which is about 450 tons a day, so in 1 year we already went up to 1/3 of our capacity. So there's a big need for this, and our belief is that food, wasted food, there's 160 million tons of wasted food in our country every year. It's a huge market. And the animal feed market is also huge. 100 million tons of soy and corn going to feed animals every year. So there's enormous opportunity here to recycle, this resource into a productive capacity. Thank you.
So Kent might need to have you kind of broaden things out from a company-specific, discussion to a more industry-specific discussion, the role of renderers in addressing the waste issue.
Yeah, thank you. So as we've seen a lot of focus on food waste, and USDA came out with the plan in 2015, I think it was, our initial thought was, welcome to our world. So our industry is built around recycling food waste, carbon reduction, and we've been doing it since the late 1800s. Or if you wanted to be less technical, you could go back to Roman times when parts of the animal weren't eaten and converted to soap and things like that. So, but in the U.S., we really, our industry became more commercial in the early 1900s and late 1800s. And initially, we were fertilizers. So I should step back one and explain what our member companies do. About 40 to 50% of an animal in this country, not in all countries, but in this country, is not eaten because of our cultural preferences. So we don't eat some of the organs and internal parts of an animal. We recycle that into usable feed ingredients, pet food ingredients, chemicals. Biofuel is a big market now, and it's basically, if you cook something in a skillet, say a hamburger, the fat melts off and you have a protein component. Well, we do that on an industrial scale with the parts of the animal that we don't eat. So we get a protein component, which is similar, looks similar to soybean meal. It's dried. And we have a fat component, which is, in the old days, was lard and tallow. As society moved away from eating animal fats in the 80s and 90s, most of that's been used for feed, pet food, and biofuel. So, and we also collect used cooking oil from restaurants. So if you go in a back alley here in town, you'll see containers that will have member companies, Darling Ingredients or other companies that are members of our association that collect used cooking oil. And that really started big time during World War II. Our companies started picking up those products. Our companies are really good at reprocessing what would not otherwise be used. So some of our companies make a bakery byproduct meal. So all the leftovers from a bakery is dried down and made into a feed ingredient. Intestines from a pig are used to make heparin, which is a good ingredient. Those intestines are then hydrolyzed and turned into a feed ingredient. So everything is utilized. We also have a research foundations. I was listening earlier to some of the innovative uses for plant products, but we have the same thing on the animal side. We have Fats and Proteins Research Foundation that was developed in the 1960s to find improve uses and find other uses for animal byproducts. And we have the Animal Co-Products Research and Education Center in Clemson University that looks for new uses like bioplastics and things like that made out of these leftovers.
Very good. Well, Samuel, I want to start cycle things kind of back to you here as we look at some of the various uses, the various innovations that were just discussed. Obviously, this is a very big problem. The issue of waste within agriculture, waste within food writ large. Do you all right now have the capacity to put a sufficient enough dent in this problem? If you all were able to, maybe scale up some of your technologies, what is the potential of the folks here on stage? I know you can only speak for one of them, but what is the potential that we're looking at right now?
I think it's massive. And Denali's story has been one of scaling up massively over the last 5 years. That's largely been through acquisitions, but we have gone from just handling residuals from food production and biosolids from municipal generators to now we have 5 feed conversion facilities, doing things like these two gentlemen we're talking about. So it's there. What we've done is created a network across the country to be able to offer multiple solutions wherever we are. I think one of the things we'll probably get into here is that these residuals, they have different uses. Sometimes they're much better to go to animal feed as opposed to anaerobic digestion. Sometimes the scale and the nature of the material makes it really suited for land application. So what we're doing is building out a network so that we can offer a range of solutions. We can handle different materials across the country. And there's just awesome tailwinds here. I think we're going to see some of the technologies and techniques that we're talking about here just become the norm because, like it was mentioned, we are throwing dollars into holes or just burning them. These are things that have valuable nutrients, and they have tremendous worth for farmers. We've tallied up the kind of value that we provide to farmers by taking residuals from poultry plants and applying them as fertilizers. It's hundreds of dollars per acre. That's money that farmers get to keep in their rural communities rather than just giving to the fertilizer company.
Yeah, so the scale of waste, and from our perspective, but if you look at the world, there are not that many trillion-dollar industries, right? There's automotive, there's cellular, there's computers. Waste is something that every single person on the world is going to interact with, whether it's waste from animals that they consume, waste of their own. The fact is, waste is the biggest untapped resource in the entire world. And with proper policy initiatives in the US will become the leader in putting those technologies throughout the entire world. I've been to many places and have seen the waste in other countries and the way it's handled. The US is at the forefront today, and with continued public sector support, the US, the private sector will totally and utterly dominate worldwide the waste upcycling. And I think we're in a place now we can have another trillion-dollar industry, just like cellular, that is won and owned in the US.
Got to have you drill down on that. You talk about the need for public support, the need for policy innovation. Can you expand on what you're getting at there?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at many of the things that have come out in the last 10 years from a public standpoint, something that's huge is investment tax credits have gone into a number of things, specifically anaerobic digesters, solar farms, wind farms, those sorts of things. What investment tax credits have not tackled is this concept of waste stream upcycling, turning liquid waste streams that contain nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, carbon, ammonia, and turning those into useful byproducts that displace fossil fuel-derived products. Most people don't realize that 3% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions are used to make ammonia fertilizer. This is via a process using natural gas, where you take N2 molecules and you turn them into NH3 molecules. That is the Haber-Bosch process. What people fail to realize even more is that 3% of worldwide greenhouse gases, additionally, are used for wastewater plants that take NH3 molecules, ammonia, and turn them back into N2 molecules. There should be some sort of investment tax credit, public support, not from an investment standpoint, but to support private sector investment, to close that loop where you can take NH3 molecules that exist in waste and displace fossil fuel-derived NH3 molecules. And again, the private sector is solving this and will solve this, but something like an investment tax credit could catalyze it in a way that could put the US as the absolute forefront of nutrient recycling in the world.
Scott, it looks like you were looking to weigh in there.
Oh, I'm just thinking. I mean, I love this. I don't often get to talk trash, so this is great. I'll talk trash all day.
See, somebody else made the pun before I did. I want that noted in the room.
Yeah, no, I mean, so food waste. Do you know that 40% of our agricultural land in this country is dedicated to growing food for animals? And if we actually freed up that land to feed people, we'd be able to feed an extra billion people. I mean, it's enormous. And meanwhile, we're wasting this food that's a nutrient. And if you look at, we happen to believe that you should capture this food and keep it in the food chain. We have food insecurity issues. We have animals. There's all this sort of related benefits from doing so. And if you look at what the EPA recommended hierarchy for dealing with food waste is, the first thing they say is, well, we should reduce it and prevent it, which we believe is correct. There's just too much, it's a ridiculous amount of waste. And there is a lot of money being invested in that. The second thing it says is what we should do is feed hungry people. Of course, gather as much food as we can and recycle it and deliver it to people that are hungry. We support that. The problem with both of those things is it's very difficult to scale, and no matter what we do, we're still going to have a lot of leftover food. Can't be used to feed people, can't reduce it just by prevention. So the third choice for the EPA is, well, if you can't prevent it and you can't feed hungry people, feed animals. So that's where we are. And because, again, you've got all these ancillary benefits. And then lower down is, all right, well, let's use it for industrial purposes. Let's take this and let's make energy out of it, okay? Or let's make fertilizer out of it. Or the very last, point is, well, let's burn it and then do what they call waste to energy, euphemistically, which is basically incineration. So we can have an enormous impact here. And I think, oops, sorry, my Bright Feeds hat is falling down here. Anybody come up wants a Bright Feeds hat, you come, let me know. I'll get you one. I think the point is that there's economic benefits to doing this to the country. I mean, if we recycle this food, we can save millions of dollars for businesses and municipalities that otherwise have to pay. My state is exporting 900,000 tons of waste a year because the incinerators are shutting down. It's a huge cost, and it's an environmental catastrophe. And that's going on everywhere. So we can save millions of dollars for businesses and municipalities, and at the same time, we're selling this recycled food at a discount to feed products, so we're saving money for farmers. So there's a lot of economic benefits there, and I think that economics has to be the driver. If you've got a good environmental solution, it's great. People get very excited. This is really a critical challenge we have to face, climate change. But when you go to businesses and say, you should do this, it's great, but it's going to cost you money, they back away. It's hard to get them interested. But if you can go and say, I can save you money, oh, and by the way, this is also a really, you can get carbon credits, or you can build your carbon brand, well, then they're all over it because they want to do the right thing. But if you make it an economic incentive and you give them that credit, they'll be really excited. That's what we've been finding anyway.
Kent, I know you're looking again at the industry level as opposed to the company level, but walk us through some of the policy hurdles that your members are facing right now that you're really could potentially be hamstringing innovation within your sector.
Well, I agree with what you just said on letting economics dictate, and so some policy seems to be aimed at promoting technologies versus promoting the end goal, which is to reduce food waste, very strongly promoting certain technologies. And so what would help the overall goal is to have a technology neutral approach, which we saw, when biofuels first started to be developed, our products were left out of certain policies for biomass-based diesel. And our discussion at the time was, let's be neutral on our feedstocks when it came to biofuel. And that market is neutral on feedstocks now, and that market has really developed. And I think the same when it comes to food waste programs. There are a lot of technologies out there, not just a few. And a more technology neutral approach will help innovation. It'll help drive new businesses to where that can be viable.
Folks, just a reminder, I've got plenty more questions to go, but if you have any for our panelists, please do feel free to use Slido. Let us know what you're thinking, what you'd like to hear from this group. I do want to go back to you, Samuel, and start a conversation about financing and capital requirements and how exactly you all have gone about addressing that need within your particular businesses. Any, has it been private sector funding? Has the government stepped in to be of assistance? What does that look like for Denali?
For us, it has been private sector funding. We bring to investors a very attractive growth proposition. We point to things like the legislation in California, SB 1383, what's happening nationally, including what the US EPA has put out. I mean, all signs indicate that organics recycling is an opportunity for growth. So we've been very successful at attracting that capital.
Stanley, what about you all?
Yeah, so we're a privately held company, and we have raised funding almost exclusively at the private level. So we've invested about $290 million into the technology so far, and are probably going to invest another $450 this year. The private sector wants to invest in this, and the key is that if the private sector invests, they need clear line of sight on regulatory impacts and regulatory changes. And that's another thing where I want to go back briefly to that investment tax credit. That's critical because it's a pay-for-performance type investment by the government. You only actually pay that out if there's success. We have taken basically no grants, and the reason is that oftentimes they're misaligned for what we're trying to do, or the fact is there's too much overhead. And so the private sector is really in a place to solve these problems in a huge way. And the fact is, I will go back to that, it's a $1 trillion market opportunity. This is an absurdly large market opportunity that the private sector wants to invest in, and the government just needs to provide that regulatory clarity to be able to make that investment.
I want to stick with you here for a second, Stanley, because we did have a question come in, and Samuel, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it too. But we have a question asking folks to address PFAS rules or regulations affecting business models. So how has that regulatory uncertainty, PFAS or otherwise, impacted you all?
So just a quick commentary. I mentioned one of our business lines is in organic fertilizer from animal waste streams. A second business line is biosolids. We process biosolids. We have innovative biosolids processing technologies in several states. So really what we're seeing from PFAS, the uncertainty of PFAS regulation, the fact that it's unknown, is causing things to lock up from an investment standpoint to a certain degree. There's ways to get around that, but what we're seeing is that there's the private sector is a little hesitant to invest in certain things because there's an unknown. We are, however, seeing that there's tremendous upward pressure on biosolids disposal costs. Just for everyone's reference, to set the ground a little bit, wastewater plants, when you flush the toilet, the product goes to a wastewater plant. The wastewater plant, through various settings, concentrates and refines that product into what's referred to as a biosolid. That is oftentimes where all of the PFAS, which is referred to as forever chemicals, will end up. There's unknown regulatory action at a federal level for that. There are certain regulatory impacts at state levels that we've seen an outright ban in states like Maine, or we're seeing potential bans in states like Washington State and elsewhere. Again, what that is doing is that is causing, simultaneously, it's improving our business because there's upward pressure on those prices. So we can build a more expensive plant to solve the problem, but simultaneously it's causing private sector to not want to invest in that. And so that's one where I think that the biggest thing we need here is more science before regulations come out. Because I think there are certain unknowns. People are like, is it parts per trillion? Is it parts per billion? Where do you have an issue with PFAS? And I think it's unknown. Another huge thing I will add to that, there's certain unknowns on where it comes from. So just want to throw out the commentary there that it's regulatory clarity that would help us.
Samuel, the question specifically asked Denali's biosolids standpoint on PFAS and other regulatory pressures.
Yeah, to echo what Stanley said, and I think we talked about it even on the prep call, for this is that we do need regulatory clarity. I think if you look back at the history of the biosolids industry in this country, when science has emerged about a new contaminant, the industry has risen to the challenge. And for many of us in the biosolids management industry, we see it as a business opportunity. Depending on what sort of levels are put out by the EPA, there's going to be an opportunity for treatment technologies here. I think we've also seen really encouraging things from states like Michigan that have gone beyond where the US EPA is at and actually defined limits or different ranges. I think it's 20, 50, 150 in that area that Michigan has set out. And is it parts per trillion or parts per billion on that one?
I think it depends on the actual species of compound.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. If you have an industrial source that is going into a wastewater treatment plant, if you can trace the PFAS entering that plant back to that source and remedy it there at the source, that is a much more effective way at chasing the PFAS problem than dealing with it once it's in the biosolids. Did I answer your question sufficiently?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
Of course. Yeah.
And if I may just add
Yeah.
briefly onto that, that's really where the science is going to be critical here, right? I think that the EPA should spend some time on where are the PFAS coming from. And I think they will find that there are much less expensive ways than putting the PFAS cost onto the public municipalities, which is at the wastewater plant, right? Is it coming from industrial users, like Sam mentioned? Is it coming from landfills? Where is this PFAS coming from? Because if you actually spend that time, all of a sudden now the producer can pay for it, not some random municipality who ended up with the product.
Yeah, and I'll say just so everyone in the room is on the same page, where we're at with this with the US EPA is that we have a test method, and grateful for that, but we do not have the level set out. So we have a solid way of measuring how much PFAS is in biosolids or other similar materials, but we do not know how to interpret those results. And we also had a drinking water guidance come out from EPA that basically set the safe level of PFAS at 0. It's such a small amount that it's really close to our ability to detect it at that low level. So it's just a tricky spot for the industry. But the solution is not to just jump to where Maine is at of putting all this material in landfills. You look at the costs that are stacking up there. The other thing that a lot of folks don't know is that you have leachate from landfills. You have a liquid that collects in the landfill itself, and then that needs to go be treated as well. So we're in a difficult place. I'm really hoping for regulatory clarity soon here, but in the meantime, beneficial reuse of biosolids needs to go on.
Scott, we've had a couple of questions come in asking for just thoughts and interpretations on the administration's draft food waste national strategy. One specifically asks, and I feel like I'll get a good response from you on this question, is it picking winners or losers?
So I kind of like what Ken said, is we should not be picking winners and losers. I think we should be technology agnostic. But what I would say, so we did make a comment on the policy, the national policy that was recently released. We were invited to make comment. But one of the things that we noticed is that a lot of technologies were not written into the legislation. So we saw things like anaerobic digestion and composting, things like that, which are older technologies, which are well known, and as a result, they are often written in. But it doesn't make sense to be cutting out, new technologies or other things that can be adding to the solution. Another thing I think that we need in policy is, some guys have talked about tax credits and other, or grants, and all those things are great, but I think we also need better infrastructure, to be honest. Like on the food waste side, what we're doing now, we're seeing policies that are gradually requiring companies that have food waste to separate it and then to send it out. So we're getting regulation that way. That makes sense. But if we're going to do that, we need to provide them with places to bring it. So we need collection points that are different from your traditional, because the way the system is geared now is, food waste gets brought to a transfer station, it's all commingled, it's a mess, and then it gets picked up and brought to an incinerator or a landfill. And what we need are places where you can keep that distinct, like collection points for organic waste, let's say. And then it can be aggregated and brought and used more distinctly than in its current system. So we need some more of those, so you make it economic and convenient for the collection of that material. And then it can be processed. You can bring it and do all sorts of things with it. Look, the other thing is that you need to provide a good incentive. One of the things that I would just point out is that some of the other solutions, let's say like anaerobic digestion, it's not that economic. You're taking food or organic waste and you're turning it into energy or biogas, which is great. But it still requires a subsidy. You have to pay a $60 a ton or $70 a ton tipping fee there. It's better than sending it to an incinerator where you're paying $150, but you still have to pay a subsidy. At composting, you have to pay $40 or $50 a ton. So these are better solutions, but really what we want to do is drive that down. So that's why I said in our case, we actually pay for that content because it's a valuable resource. So I think those kinds of incentives are important to think about when you're driving this solution.
Kent, I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I wonder if we can drill down a little bit more. Thoughts on that national strategy and what it particularly means for your membership as it currently stands.
Yeah, but the one part, it wasn't in the national strategy, but it goes to the EPA's food waste hierarchy, which changed from a pyramid to this U-shaped hierarchy. And in the hierarchy, composting and anaerobic digestion were mentioned specifically. So again, looking at technologies versus the end goal, the issue for us is states are looking at meeting their mandates on reducing food waste, and they look at that. California specifically really looked at the old pyramid hierarchy that you had mentioned earlier. It can shape policies in states when some of these U.S. policy or national policies or even strategies come out. So for us, you start promoting these other technologies. We've often suffered because our industry had been called for many years the hidden industry. So we did all this work that everybody's talking about since the late 1800s. We've been doing it very quietly and are highly efficient at it. And now that it's a popular thing to do, and you can say we were green before green was cool, right? But now that it's more popular, we're getting all this new technology, which is good. We need all technologies. And so I'm not against any technology, but when you start promoting specific ones, now you're not really reducing food waste, you're diverting food waste or stream from one technology to another. But the end result should be reducing food waste.
Well, and that goes to another question that it's been submitted, and Kent, I'll kind of let you start on this one, but the question reads: how much of the effort to properly minimize food waste is brand new versus current efforts simply being an extension of what we've done for years/decades? I know rendering itself is not necessarily a new technology, but are there innovations within the space that are improving your sector's capacity to handle some of this waste?
Well, yeah, there are constant technology improvements as far as equipment goes, and I'm not a plant guy, but the plant guys can really tell you all the different equipment and what it does and how phenomenal it is. We've put a lot of money in our research foundation, both ACRIC and FBRF, into not only new and different uses. I was just telling my colleague, we made these plant pots out of meat and bone meal, so you can plant them at a nursery or something, and they just dissolve into the ground, and it's fertilizer. And when we were doing that research, this really famous older guy in the industry said, we were doing that in 1960, and so we replaced fish meal in aquaculture rations, right? Which reduces global reliance on these key species in the ocean. The NGOs are all about the fish in, fish out ratio into aquaculture. Our proteins replace fish meal because we're an animal-based protein and our amino acid balance is more similar. And so I was looking at our old books, and we were doing research on that back in the 50s and 60s. It was just the wrong time. But it is happening now. And so some of the other research we're doing is on wastewater treatment. So, it's wastewater treatment is a very big focus of ours coming out of plants and what you do with DAF and different ways to clean up water.
Can I address that for a second? Because it's a very interesting question, and it also relates to something Stanley was saying too about new technologies coming in, addressing old problems or redoing new old processes and making them new. So in our case, our industry, what we're doing is, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of years old, right? You take the slops and you take the slop and you feed the pigs, right? Everybody knows this has been around for a long time. But so it's not necessarily a new concept, and what we've done is brought in new technology. So we've got patents here. But we brought in new AI technology, new sensor technology, so that when we're mixing our food, we can tell in every batch how much protein, oils, fats, fibers, carbohydrates or in every batch we produce. That didn't exist before. I mean, it hasn't really existed. The guys used to use something that they called the smell test. Seriously. They'd go out on the floor, mix the stuff, and go, I think we need to mix some of that stuff over there. And that's how it was done, because you're just feeding the animals. It's a different world. So one is bringing new technology like AI or sensors. Another one is on the drying side, because we use dryers. But the old technology that's been around has been used those old sort of big fossil fuel intensive drum dryers, gigantic. People don't know that drying, industrial drying in our country uses about 5% of total energy. Chemical industry, food industry, paper industry, giant dryers. And so this technology has been around for a long time, but there's new innovations here that can be terrific in saving energy use. So in our case, we also have patents on the drying technology where we don't use fossil fuels. We use very little energy, and we're still able to dry this food at 600 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds through the process. So I think a lot of it is you want to see if there are new approaches, but at the same time, maybe take some of these other old ideas and apply what new technologies that are around today and see what you can do with them.
Stanley, Samuel, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll say on the technology side, the technology of depackaging, which it's not AI, it's actually like drums, grinders, and screens, and it uses the property of organic waste that you can smash it through a screen, right? And the plastic and cardboard's going to stay on the other side. Right. But we see huge promise in this, and we're rolling out our network of depackaging machines to 40 more cities. We're already quite active in Texas and in the Southwest with it. But when you apply that technology with our experience in routing trucks to pick up food waste from grocery stores, we're seeing a doubling or a tripling of the amount of organics that we're able to recycle from grocery stores. And the reason is that no longer does a grocery store employee have to open that cereal box and then open the plastic bag within. It can all just get chucked into one bin. They're able to repurpose that employee to then go work on their donation programs. So we're seeing a huge increase, talking about the EPA's hierarchy here of donations as well. And then, depending on the stream, that's either suitable for animal feed or for composting. So, I mean, it's when I talk to reporters about this, it's not some super high tech thing. It's a technology that's been around for a while, but now we're able to scale it, and it's going to have a huge impact on retail food waste in this country.
Yeah. So on the topic of technology, one thing I want to bring up or comment on organics. I think everyone's familiar with organic food. You've probably been to Whole Foods, right? The United States has the strongest organic food organization of any country in the world. Our regulations are crisp. The way that it's enforced is very well done. The regulators just do a phenomenal job. Organic does not mean no technology. It means no synthetic inputs. And I think that's a very important thing to realize. We've seen a certain amount of regulatory questions around new technologies in organic fertilizer production, which is one thing that we do. And I think it's critical that people take a pragmatic look at the organic industry, realizing that what this needs is continued innovation from a technology standpoint, not blocking innovation from a technology standpoint. Happy to provide more context on that, but it's really around leaving the regulations the way they are to allow people to innovate so that you can have higher yields, you can have better products, you can have lower greenhouse gas emissions from organics while still allowing that innovation.
Stanley, you've got a question that's submitted exactly for you, and so I'm going to let you bring us home as a panel here. We have somebody wondering if you can quantify the potential of tons of fertilizer of NP and K that you all could replace. I mean, basically, the person says, what is the size of the prize here from animal and food waste?
The size of the prize is astronomical. If you look at the United States, we have over 300 million people, over 10 million dairy cows, tens of millions of hogs, right? You're talking about a tremendous number of waste producing, and I'll use waste producing, right? They're producing products that, if we went back 20,000 years, would have gone onto the soil to grow the crops that it would have eaten. So if you draw a circle around the world, we're not exporting or importing nutrients. If the United States didn't export food, we wouldn't have to import nutrients. The reason that nutrients have to be produced is because where the crop is grown is not where the humans are. To answer the question very simply, the reason we can't recycle more today is because there doesn't exist technologies that can take waste nutrients into a form that's a commercial nutrient. That's what Sedron really does, is it takes waste nutrients and puts them into a commercial, fungible form of a commercial commodity. So the size of the market is huge. If you took just the human waste in the US, you could fertilize the crop needs for about 30 million acres. Just the dairy waste in the US is about 10 million acres, right? You start to add some of these other animals on there and you get insane scale of nutrients. So the other thing I'll note there is a lot of times now, because of the form of these nutrients, the nutrients from those 300 million people are going in the wrong places, right? To incredible environmental deleterious effect, right? You're getting nutrients into the waterways, you're getting algae blooms. That is all caused from excess nutrient runoff. If you could capture those nutrients, put them into a concentrated form that's transportable and storable, and precision apply that to the crops when and where they need it, you can absolutely solve all those issues, and the private sector is doing this today.
Very good. Well, folks, what a conversation. Certainly no wasted time or words up here. Really appreciate our panelists for joining us. Please join me in thanking them. And before we hear from Executive Editor Philip Brasher and our next panel, please turn your attention to the screens. Two more messages from our sponsors.
Farmers are always there for each other. We shed tears together, we celebrate together, but we also grow together. Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in the country. We have the farmers' back. If you're a farmer and you're not a member, we would welcome you into our Farm Bureau family. And if you want to know more about agriculture, come be part of this great family.
We're not here to talk about today. Let's talk about tomorrow, and the many tomorrows after. The tomorrows that you're making possible through sustainability. It's a marathon growers have been running for generations. It takes money, it takes time, and when you never get any credit, it takes a toll. But you still do it for your family, for your community, for your legacy. So you can leave your farm in better shape than you found it. And we're here to tell you, you don't have to do it alone. Because while you're on the land, we're in the lab, developing solutions to help you drive yields higher at lower carbon intensity. While you're walking your fields, we're walking beside you, delivering new technologies and innovations to help you become more efficient. When you're investing in new and improved ways to grow, we're investing in you, building partnerships that reward sustainable farming. And when you're tired of never getting any respect for the difference you're making, we're going to tell the world with a big, giant megaphone. So here's to the tomorrow makers, because you're the ones making a tomorrow for us all.